Hi, Mariana. Okay, I'll let everyone get in here, like usual. But I need a haircut. It's getting bad. I got a green screen coming too for silly background, but hasn't come yet. No doubt. Good morning, Efrain. Oh wait, I get. Where are you? It's 2 p.m. for me. Well, 2:03. You must be in a different country where it's morning still, unless you just got up and it feels like morning. You sleeping in, Efrain? Watching too much Price is Right? Losing track of time. I've lost track of time. It feels like Friday every day, kind of. Right. Yasmina's calling you out. Calling you out. I don't blame yourself. It's this whole quarantine thing. Every day is the Lord's day. It does feel like that. I've been getting more sleep. I was like, I don't know how that's possible. I got to homeschool the kid and she's here more, and that's great. Taking care of her then more and stuff like that. I think I said this one day. I don't know how homeschoolers do it. Wow, it's like, especially when you're at home, like, you got stuff to do here that's fun and not school. So you're like, okay, let's do these numbers here. It's really great with numbers. Now let's apply that to how many times I can make Mario jump over this turtle. Oh, Callie, if you have any problem with questions, I can just reopen them for you, and you can do them that way. It's fine. I've just been, trying to crack down a little bit since there were too many people that were just waiting till later and then watching the video and putting the right answers in with zero to little effort. Well, I'll be honest. I know I have one friend who was homeschooled, and actually I took first and second year Chinese with him at UVA, and he was an awesome student. I mean, I don't think any stereotypes hold true. Some of my best students have been athletes, for example. That's one stereotype you always hear is, oh, athlete students. Oh man, student athletes. Some of my best have been athletes. In fact, when I did Dracula summer session last year, I guess, Bryce Perkins was one of my students for, I think it was session 2 that year. And for the final exam, they had to do a live action vampire LARP. I mean, how many of them had done that in the first place, and how many would ever want to do that outside of it being their final exam? He was like the number one player that day. But in general, he was just a great student. He's just a good guy. That's just it. Yeah, I don't want to say stereotypes ring true for homeschoolers, but I can tell you that just from doing it myself here the past couple weeks, that homeschooling is tough. I don't know how you can pull it off, like for a solid 5, 8 hour day or so. It's man, because the kids there like with their stuff, and they're not in this like it's like how do they understand this is a different setting technically, even though it's their own home? Of course, Bryce Perkins won in LARP. He was good. Well, I said he was the best player. I didn't mean he necessarily won the LARP, actually. In fact, he didn't. There was a high school student that was I sometimes get high school students in summer sessions. I think it's called the Rainy program or something like that. And he was actually the top player in the sense of beating something. Bryce just wanted to fight everybody in the game. but but he was like getting the character, and like, everyone's like, oh, I couldn't. And there are actually a couple players that year, and one guy in the basketball team, he was in the session before that, and he did good. He enjoyed it. He put some video of it on Instagram. You would love the LARP. Efrain, you should take Dracula's summer session then. Oh no, first 2 sessions though this year are digital, so I'm gonna have to figure out how to digitally do a LARP. I think I'm gonna use this site called Roll20. I've used it before for online role playing games, so we'll probably have to do it like that. It's still fun. But yeah. J-Term Dracula, though, we rent out the rotunda and it's catered, and those people come dressed in costumes. It's crazy. Okay, well, it looks like pretty much everyone's here, so I will get started then with our lecture for today. So we only have one more cultural lecture after this. That will be next Wednesday, the 1990s. This is 1980s we're in here now. Very depressing, yet also hilarious decade in a number of ways for Eastern Europe. Can I say that? Especially for Russia. So this is actually a poster that I got and altered from Glasnost era. That's one of the things that this era is known for. And you're going to actually see the original poster a little later in the lecture, but just this mouth spewing out black bile pretty much summarizes Soviet culture and politics in the 1980s. If you thought it wasn't funny before, just wait. Here we go. All right, so what's this era all about? All right, so here's our three main topics here for today, and then we'll get in the film. There's only really a little bit I have to add to the film. The stuff you saw happening 60s and 70s eventually just sort of reached their full fruition here, and I'll get to that. But I'm going to just say it briefly now just to give you some sense of where this is going. So we looked at stuff like Yugoslav Black Wave, and you guys had to watch that film for Monday, WR, The Mysteries of the Organism. I mean, like, imagine that stuff all the time and worse to where people are basically filming themselves eating poop. And you're going to get films from the 1980s eventually, at least the end of the decade. It just gets nuts. Anyway, so here's the three things we'll talk about before we get to film. The end of Soviet might. Oh no, Soviet Union finally starts to fall apart, like visibly. Literally and figuratively, as you'll see. The gerontocracy, always hilarious. And then Glasnost and Perestroika, which are the two, like, you know, click words that this era is known for, primarily Glasnost, and there are other words too, but these are like the big ones that Westerners, especially Americans, had known about and had seen in papers and stuff like that. So let's see now. All right, the end of Soviet might. So if you remember, this is technically still the stagnation period up until the middle of the 1980s. So you're seeing the end of that here. So as I mentioned for the 1970s, one of the big things that was different about that period culturally is that people in the Soviet Union, especially Russia, like everyone's playing the part like everything still means something, but no one really believes it anymore. And now people are not believing it to the extent that they're just like, yeah, this is stupid. And they just started to get more and more vocal about it, and the dissidents were part of where that came from. But politicians still had a ways to go there. Soviet politicians still had yet to really admit, you know, maybe this whole communism, socialism thing isn't working out. I don't think it's on paper. It sounds good, but we kind of have proven throughout the Soviet bloc and Russia that it just doesn't really seem to work right, you know? I don't know. So, end of Soviet might. At this point, by the time you get to the middle 1980s, like, you know, 1970s even, but especially the early 1980s, before this, right under Khrushchev and Stalin, the Soviet Union was viewed as this world power that was dangerous, and they had all this industry, and oh my God, where are they going to go next? And they go out into space, and et cetera, et cetera. Similar, this is very similar parallel here to how Russia was viewed before the fall of the Tsardom, right? So right when you're getting into the Russo-Japanese War, 1904, 1905, the way Russia was viewed then, you know, before they lost, and everyone was like, oh, wait, actually there's something wrong with that country. This is the point in this Soviet period where pretty much everybody except Soviet politicians is like, something wrong here. This is probably going to end up bad. So here we have posters that one of the key things that really illustrates this was the Soviet war with Afghanistan. So here we have a Soviet poster on the left and then a anti-Soviet poster on the right, Free Afghanistan. Of course, the United States took part in that. You probably know about CIA intervention in this war. All right, Babra Karmal, this is great. So what happened was, first off, a leader got in a position there who supported Soviet policies in actuality, but they didn't like him. So he was assassinated by this other guy, and then that guy was assassinated by Soviets, and then Karmal was part of that. And they literally flew Karmal in by plane. And they're like, here's your actual leader, okay? This is the guy that's going to run Afghanistan now. So why did they want to get so involved in Afghanistan anyway? Like, why the United States? Well, we had a clear reason for that. At least, you know, we say we did. I'm not going to get into politics there and what you should think. Or, I mean, of course, whenever 9/11 happened, because I mean, geez, I don't know how old some of you were when that happened, but I was I was in college at that time. I can remember the impact of that culturally from that war, and from especially that moment and what it meant to people. The impact of 9/11 is still very fresh in my mind, and what it meant to me is still very clear to me. Like to some of you, it might not be at all. You may have been really young then and be like, what did it actually mean? I can give you a good example of what that meant, and to sort of as an analogy to this. Um, so not too long after the planes had hit the World Trade Center and stuff like that, other targets too. Um, so it was about a week or two after that, and I was at a local flea market in my hometown back in Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh. And walking around the flea market, everyone's just kind of talking and trying to act like, things are getting back to normal. And then what happened was in the distance, a plane goes over. It's like, not even anywhere close to the actual flea market. It was the eeriest thing I ever saw. So I'm walking, and I almost bump into the person in front of me. I'm like, what the hell? And I look up, absolutely, except for kind of me and maybe like one or two other people, everyone stopped and looked at that plane, and they just watched it. Like it was just amazing to see that just revealed right there how much that meant to them. That those moments, even if they weren't there in New York and in Pennsylvania too, when this happened, it meant that much that they were like, oh my god, like everything stopped. It was like time stood still. It was the most eerie thing I have ever seen. So, well, how does that apply here? Well, Russia has always had issues with what do we do with the Central Asian republics? What do we do to control Russia's southern borders so that we don't have people invading and coming in there? That is one of the primary reasons the Mongol invasion happened, right? The Tatar Mongol Yug. This is going back to, this is back in 11th and 12th century, right? So Russia has always recognized politically, culturally that it's a little weak down there. And then you have these Central Asian republics that don't officially align with Russia and difficult to control because they are so far away from the center of Russia in Moscow, and include St. Petersburg in there too, under the Tsar. So what do we do with this? So that's always been an interest for Russia, is what do we do with those parts of the world? How can we control them? How can we use them, in this case, as a buffer to stop other invasions and stuff? That was one of the primary interests in Afghanistan, was if we control that area with a puppet leader, we can make it Soviet essentially, like the Soviet satellite states that Stalin got after World War II, and this gives us a buffer. So if anything bad happens, well, basically the brunt of it will go to Afghanistan and other countries you control down there, and then Russia itself will be fine. This is the idea. So it wasn't supported. The Afghans are like, this guy's full of crap. So here we have this piece of propaganda that was spread with planes and stuff in Afghanistan to the rebels. You can see it's in Arabic there as well as English. And so you got Karmal here. He's like, blah, 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 blah. And then you got Brezhnev behind him telling him what to do. Yeah, Charlie Wilson's War. That's a good movie. So he was seen by most Afghans to be a puppet leader at first. They knew it was total sham. And here's some more propaganda that's being spread by CIA and pro-Afghan rebels. You got Brezhnev there injecting Karmal with Soviet politics into there, and there on the right there is even more horrible looking. You have Brezhnev with like the Viking helmet on, sipping at wine there as Karmal and his associates beat and apparently raped this Afghan woman. I mean, good. There's another one. Internal Islamic Front, Afghanistan. You see, you have this mother and her child there, and then the Soviet bomb falling on them. So already to you should be like, oh, this is like the Soviet equivalent of Vietnam, man. It's exactly what it's like. It's a very easy analogy to make. As culturally devastating to America as the Vietnam War was, that's what the Soviet-Afghan War was to Russians and Soviet Union in general. And they call it, if you can read Russian, it says Afghanskaya Vayna. They actually call it the Afghan War, but foreign, in international media referred to it typically as Soviet-Afghan War. So this is essentially the equivalent of Vietnam for them, and it was a war that no one really wanted to fight. Back in the Cuban Missile Crisis and Korean War, those things still made sense, as they did to us. But by this point, similar to lots of Americans not agreeing with the Vietnam War, most Soviet citizens were like, why are we doing this? I don't understand why you're trying to, what do we care about Afghanistan for? I don't get it. No one's falling for these platitudes anymore, and no one agrees with it really anymore. And the Americans helped the Afghan rebels. We supplied them with missiles and such, as this image is showing you here, right? And we know the effects of that later were actually part of what led to 9/11 eventually. Our involvement in that region eventually comes back to haunt us. But, at this time we were fighting a proxy war with the Soviets and helping the Afghan rebels to win. That's what it was about. It's a great movie here. In 2006, there was a release of this film about the Afghan War that has all this archival footage about Soviet soldiers serving there. So I'm just going to play a little bit for you here. Soundtrack and everything's great. And if you watch it, if you didn't know that this is the Afghan War and didn't hear them speaking Russian, just the way that it is done, the editing and the filming techniques and the music, you would probably think, oh, this is a Vietnam War film. Just pay attention. It almost feels like a Vietnam War film because it looks so similar in so many ways. I'm just going to show you some bits of it to give you some sense of the Soviet-Afghan War. And it has subtitles, but because I have to show it to you on the smaller screen here, it probably be hard for you to read them, but it's okay. I just want you to kind of get the visuals.
А сейчас мы едем по населенному пункту Чарикар. Это очень неспокойное место. Отсюда и до самого Кабула начинается самое опасное.
As he's just saying there, in case you couldn't read it, that they're on the road here to Kabul, and this is like the most dangerous zone on the road.
Зона на нашей трассе.
We've got Bruce Lee inside the tank there.
Soldiers, they will coming. Oh, they're coming to burn us. Oh boy, we need your hope to live. Oh boy, you have so much to give. Oh boy, don't let it get you down. Too young to die.
Too young to die. At any rate, it's just like it feels like Vietnam documentary. It's because this is one of the best analogies in history. This is analogous to the Vietnam War for Americans. So it was condemned internationally in a number of ways. Carter, for example, there was a grain boycott we implemented in the Soviet Union embargo. So there are things we're doing there. But the most illustrative moment of this was this. 1980, the Summer Olympics were held in Moscow. It was the first time the Olympics had actually been held in Eastern Europe. This is in 1980. And the mascot, this is in my opinion, I'm saying this because I've studied Russia and stuff like this for a long time, but in my opinion, this is probably the best Olympics mascot that has ever been made. He's so cute. He's so representative of what the Olympics are about, as well as, representing Russia. Misha, or Mishka, as he was also called, this little cute bear. So what happened actually was many countries boycotted this, including the United States. Carter, who was our president at the time, condemned, Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, and this is the big thing that most of us did. We're like, we're not taking part in your Olympics. And it was a big snub to the Soviets. So this is a French poster just talking about this. So they boycotted the Olympics, and then poor Mishka is depicted here as like this dominatrix or something. Like, oh my gosh, this horrible like Soviet general who's going to send you to the gulag and whip and torture you or something. So there's a big boycott. And then, so these images here of everything breaking down. The bureaucracy is deeply entrenched. And one of the primary reasons for that is what Stalin had started to do to the party starting back in the late 20s with all these purges and eventually gulag and torture and killing. He wiped out lots of intellectuals because he was fearful of them. He didn't like their changes they implemented. He didn't like their intelligence. So he essentially, effectively, for the lack of better terminology, made the party stupider over time. And eventually what you're left with is lots of these deeply entrenched politicians who have no real incentive to change and are really withdrawn and detached from what society needed. This is something you even hear about today in American politics. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but this kind of concept, what is that? It's what we call the gerontocracy. Gerontocracy means rule by the old. So, average age of the typical member of the Politburo in the Soviet Union was they're all like elderly. No offense to the old, but if you're too detached from your base, you don't know what they need, and this is why it's always good to have younger people getting involved in politics because they can bring fresh new ideas that the older generations who may have more power can try to understand better and learn. But here, there's no incentive to do any of that. Right? You look at it, it's basically a bunch of old white guys is what the gerontocracy was. Brezhnev, for example, he was practically a living statue by the time you get to 1980. He suffered from, as I have in the slide here, he suffered from arteriosclerosis, an aneurysm, poor blood flow, heart rhythm abnormalities. Starting in like 1975, after a heart attack as they have there, his health just kept going down and down and down. I mean, there was sometimes he could barely talk in public, and people knew that, so they had to kind of like hide that and be like, yeah, Brezhnev will not be speaking today. I will tell you what he wants to say, which I basically wrote myself. So he like sometimes didn't know what was going on. He did the way he moved and walked around. He was basically a living statue. Like, why do we still have this guy in power? This is this whole entrenchment and stagnation period. Even further, the average age of members of the Politburo was 70. 70. So some people look at the American politics today and say that this is one of our problems, that we need fresh faces. We need new blood in the political system to help implement real change and to get more bipartisan politics, et cetera, et cetera. I forget what it is currently, but I think the average age of U.S. senator is upper 60s, if not around 70. I think governors, it gets to the 50s, but still much older, right? You don't get really people that are in their 30s and 40s in there. So some people have argued that we kind of have a gerontocracy thing going on sometimes too. But the elections in 2018, politicians like AOC, for example, regardless of what you think about her, people like that are exactly what you did not see happening in this context, right? People like that can get voted in America. Sometimes these really liberal, people that are really reactionary candidates can make their way in there sometimes if they have enough support. Sometimes it doesn't work out. Bernie Sanders just dropped out, for example. I called that back at the start of the semester, and I tell you that. I didn't say he was going to drop out. I said he wasn't going to get it. But he dropped out. So, he just didn't have the support. That's what it all came down to. But and he's older though, but someone like AOC was much younger and got in there, right, and got the votes that were necessary for this to work out. But Politburo has no incentive to change, and there's no real voting here, people. It's a deeply entrenched, bureaucratic, corrupt system filled with red tape and problems that nobody wants to fix because nobody has incentive to do it. This is one of the big things you often hear when someone criticizes communist or socialist system. This is one of the big things that they'll often point out, is that eventually the system becomes so entrenched, right? The people that are working inside of it are fine. And they don't really have incentive to change. They have more incentive to control their status. And there's no real incentive to change, unlike the public business sector, where if you don't change, you get fired. And you sometimes see this even in America today. I know someone who used to be an officer in the military, actually, I won't say who. And when they were in the Navy, they would always tell me stories with like, man, there's so much corruption in there sometimes. You get people in there that really can't do their job effectively. They're just moved around. Right? You don't fire them because there's no real incentive to do it. You can't really, except with this long, complicated red tape process. It's not like the business sector. So this is one of the big problems here by something that a society that's so state-run is eventually it gets to this point. And you saw this all throughout Eastern Europe. You're going to read about Albania in your textbook, for example. Total disaster, absolute disaster. What Hoxha did to that country is absolute disaster. Or look at Hungary or Bulgaria. It's a total disaster. And here we have it again. One of the problems was a bunch of old guys that really had no incentive to change. And look how they're showing the posters here out in public here in Russia. Kind of like now in Stalinist era, you look at that and be like, oh, praise Stalin, I love him. Here everyone's like walking by like, hey, you freaking idiots. Look at those faces. They don't know what they're doing. They have no idea what I want, these guys. And then Brezhnev dies November 1982. His funeral was the 15th of November 1982. A very depressing moment there. Or was it? This is just a little brief documentary video about that. And since we have to start later here and I'm waiting for people, I'll just skip that. Here's where it starts getting really funny. Okay, so that's kind of funny already to me, at least, is to see this go down. So Brezhnev basically a living statue before he dies. Well, who's going to be next? It's the same sort of process that's been there since Khrushchev, etc. It's kind of who's vying for the power position there and who has the most support internally. And that became Yuri Andropov. And you're like, okay, well, got a new guy in here. That's great. Wait a second. He died in 1984. Brezhnev died in 1980. This guy only lasts 2 years. Brezhnev was in there for, gosh, he at least made it almost 20 years. This guy's only in there for roughly 2 years. I'm laughing. He died. He wasn't in there that long. This is a good example of what the gerontocracy was also about. Literally falling apart. Not just figuratively the system falling apart. Literally, they're just dying now. So Brezhnev dies. He had all these health problems. He should not have been in power probably from 1976 tops on. But again, it's this entrenchment here. It's this entrenchment and refusal or lack of need to change. What did Andropov do? Well, he was more public actually about the Soviet Union's problems and things that needed to be fixed in the system economically. He actually was quite open about that. But there's really only one thing he's known for. The Soviets shoot down Korean Airlines Flight 007 in 1983, and they said it was a spy plane. And, Americans, other countries are like, that wasn't a spy plane. He's like, oh, no, it's a spy plane. And he's like, it's not a spy plane. Like, oh no, that's why we shut it down. They absolutely refused to admit that they did wrong here. It was totally a Soviet mistake. And there were some mistakes on both sides in the communication that was happening. But regardless, Soviets made a big mistake here, but it was not officially revealed and admitted until 1993. Now, Americans did a similar thing, actually. One of the reasons Khrushchev got involved with the Cuban Missile Crisis thing there was American spy plane got shot down over Soviet Union. And when they confronted us with this, Americans were like, yeah, we don't know what you're talking about. And Khrushchev's like, oh, really? Here's the remains of the plane and the pilot that was in it. So, and we were like, yeah, you're right. Here, though, and Andropov's like, no, it was just a spy plane? No. That's all it was. Nothing else. Spy plane. Nah, we're pretty sure that was a passenger liner and everyone died on it. Nope. So hesitance to change, and this is pretty much all he did was he took part in this horrible international relations referring to this plane being shot down. Oh, and then he dies, 1984. Time's like, geez, filling a vacuum again. What should we put in the cover here? I guess that guy. All right, so who's next? Well, we'll see. Now, the video here, actually, I'll go back to this video. Let me tell you who it was first. Konstantin Chernenko. Oh boy, 1911 and 1985. Wait! Oh, he doesn't make it a year. So Brezhnev dies, 82. Andropov's got almost 2 years in him. Chernenko, he dies like within a year. I'm sorry. I'm not laughing about people dying. I'm laughing about the fact that this was the political reality. There was all this lack of a change, and it was so deeply entrenched and ossified that even when people keep dying, they're like, oh, it will be fine with the next guy. We hope. Chernenko had been an avid smoker since age 9. He was practically dead before he even began to take. I know you can't believe this is real. It was totally real. Look at this. Look it up. It's hilarious. You're gonna read lots about it in your book too. He had emphysema even before Andropov died. Chernenko had taken roughly 3 months off from politics because his health was so bad. And then they're like, who's going to get in there next? And then someone's like, I think Chernenko is taken. Everyone's like, well, are you sure? Guy's almost dead already. They're like, no, he'd be fine. So they put him in there. Because I was like, you got too many Lenin bows on your coat there, buddy. So he gave Andropov's eulogy. That's what this video is here. And I can understand what he's saying. I'm going to see if I can find this one moment here. This is actually the full funeral for Andropov, and well, most of it, including Chernenko's eulogy. Let me see if I can find it. Now, if you can't understand Russian, you're not going to understand what he's saying. I'm not going to put the subtitles on. I just want you to pay attention, because if you look, especially if you know Russian well, you'll be able to tell that Chernenko a number of times is kind of slurring his speech. Like, there were parts where you can see, like, the other leaders are around him, like, looking at him like, oh my God, like, one, can he read? Or two, is he going to die right now? Like, they're looking like, oh my God, I think Chernenko's going to die. Give him the eulogy for the last guy that died after the guy before him died. Oh man. So let's see. I forget the exact moments here. I should write the timestamp down for myself. Let's just watch here a little bit.
Секреция как КПСС особенно полно и ярко проявилась его.
I mean, even if you don't understand Russian, you can hear it in his voice. He's like, like you guys like trying to catch his breath, just standing there.
Организаторский талант, обширные знания и богатейший жизненный опыт. В этот период усилие дает доверие к тот созидательный подъем, которым охвачен.
Now, there's a more close-up here, so Chernenko's in the middle. So you pay attention to the guys on the left and the right there. Like, occasionally you'll see them looking at him like, is he all right?
Ныне партии народа. Главное сейчас руководствуясь решением 26-го съезда партии, пленумов ЦК, закрепить и приумножить позитивные сдвиги с Юрием Владимировичем. Хочу высказать самое глубокое соболезнование его семье и
And they're like all old and falling apart. No offense, we all get there eventually, right? But again, even if you can't understand Russian, you can kind of hear in his voice. He's like slurring and catching his breath. Even funnier, so this is at Lenin's tomb, of course. In order to get Chernenko up there, what they had to do is they had to build a special escalator to make it look like he was walking up the stairs okay. And even then, he had to be assisted down the escalator so he didn't fall. That's how bad this guy was health-wise when he was put as the central leader for the Soviet Union. He was ready to die. So he does die not too long after that. Now, what did he do? Pretty much nothing. Really, the only thing Chernenko did that was memorable is he boycotted the Olympics in 1984. It's just like a baby crying because it didn't get, candy after dinner because it didn't eat good enough. Like, he's like, okay, you want to boycott our Olympics in Moscow? Right? Okay, we're going to boycott your Olympics. So, and then other Eastern Bloc countries like, yeah, we're gonna boycott it too. And everyone's like, this is meaningless. Nobody cares. So the Soviets boycotted the Olympics in 1984, and that's pretty much all Chernenko did before he died. I was gonna save a little time here because we had to start a little late. Okay, so our question here, which I'll leave up for a little longer because I know there's a slight delay for some of you. All right, so Soviet Union's end was near and its rapid decline in the 1980s featured several key features. It's kind of redundant way of word, I have to fix that. Only some of which have been considered. We have considered. Place the following in order of occurrence from first to last based on the earliest date. Okay, so you got Korean Airlines Flight 007, Yuri Andropov dies, Soviet-Afghan War, Soviet-U.S. Olympics boycott, which I just talked about. So this one shouldn't be too hard. You just got to sort them in order of what came first, what came last. The only one that might kind of trip you up is the Korean Airlines Flight 007 that was shot down. But if you remember who was in power then, just make it obvious, right? The order of this. So the Afghan War was going on for quite a while, actually. But, yeah. Yuri Andropov, oh my God. Chernenko. It's funny to me, And I'm serious, Efrain. This is real stuff. It's a comedy, basically. It's just a real life comedy. Sometimes life is funnier than fiction. Here you go. And again, whether or not you think that's what we have in American politics, I just use that as an example because some people have said, it's a similar situation where lots of our senators are deeply entrenched and are they too old? Should they still be in there? Are they disconnected from what people need now because they don't know what to do? It's a similar argument that was brought up with this whole digital push and during the quarantine procedure series. How many professors out there who are older are actually capable of doing this because they have never had incentive in lots of cases to learn how to do it? So yeah, it's the same. So that's why it's kind of analogous to things we see today. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying it's analogous. Start date for the so first one is C. So let me just help you out there since everyone's asking the question here. I'm going to a little more time. So Soviet-Afghan War comes first. Yeah. Because that was going on under Brezhnev, right? It's going on under Brezhnev. I'll just help you out there. I know. Kaylee. How do you pronounce your name? Callie. I'm going to say could be Kaylee. You can correct me. When the war started, yeah, sorry. Any problems with this, just email me. I'm a nice guy. Okay. All right. Shouldn't have been too hard though. Yeah, then, because don't forget, Andropov is part of the Korean Airlines flight, and then he dies, and then boycott under Chernenko. Okay, Kaylee. Okay, great. I got it. I got it. So one of my pronunciations was great. Okay, so this brings us to this glasnost and perestroika. So this is the image that I used for that poster at the start of this lecture. It's just one of these original glasnost posters. So what the heck is glasnost about? Well, first you got to talk about the new leader here. You can see in Time magazine, Moscow's new boss, younger, smoother, and probably formidable. Younger was important. So Mikhail Gorbachev was not like the most popular person to put in position after Chernenko because it's deeply entrenched, gerontocracy. But they're like, it's going to be, I mean, it's already a joke what's happening to our country. We can't have the next guy die too. I mean, that would just be a running gag at that point, right? Man. Oh, if you ran out of time, just email me. That's fine. I'll open it for you. So Gorbachev was younger. But he had lots of ideas. He said to his wife privately, when they knew they weren't being spied on, he's like, we can't live like this anymore. He knew something had to change, and he was about to implement some really radical change into the Soviet system. Great attempt. Gorbachev was really clear later, he's still alive, he was really clear later in later interviews, even today, he'll say, I wasn't trying to destroy the Soviet Union. Some people incorrectly think I wanted to bring the Soviet Union down. I did not. I wanted it to survive, but it didn't. And it couldn't survive. I didn't realize that then. What I tried to do was I tried to save it and to make something new out of it. But I wanted to keep it what it was. Didn't work. So glasnost and perestroika are the two really big ideas here. What really gets Gorbachev thinking that we need to fix things is the infamous Chernobyl disaster in April 1986. So he's in power after Chernenko there, and he's debating how can we fix this stuff. And this is what really pushes him over the edge, was the Chernobyl disaster in 1986. Now, so what was that? Well, all right. It's just a quick, word bubble one here, so I'll give a little extra time on this, but just participation one. So I'm sure you've heard something about Chernobyl. In fact, there was that series on HBO not too long ago. What do you think of when you hear the word Chernobyl? Just write in one word answer here, right? This is just one of these word cloud ones. When you think of this is just a memorial there. So the site's under a special lockdown today, even today. It's going to take generations upon generations until you can actually open that facility up again or do anything with it. What do you think of when you hear about Chernobyl? Especially if you've seen the HBO series. I'm going to show you the trailer from that if you haven't even heard of it. It was so horrifying to my wife. She refused to. She couldn't even get it through one episode. She's like, I'm like, why? I'm like, you watch Game of Thrones? She's like, the fact that this was real, though, is what makes this worse. Game of Thrones has gore in it, etc., but the fact that what I'm seeing here is what happened, largely speaking, is just, I can't. No, so, of course you probably know the basic details here about, oh, so yeah, Efrain, you saw, yeah, I still have to watch the rest of it. I love what I saw. I was like, man, it's hard. But most of the fallout from Chernobyl hit Ukraine, especially Belarus. When this happened, Soviets denied it even occurred. All these people in Soviet politics is gerontocracy. They were like, no, it's fine. Nothing happened. And scientists, that could detect that something was going on that was probably nuclear, they were like, yeah, no, based on the data we're getting here, there's like a nuclear cloud flying over Europe now, so that's probably nothing except a meltdown. Nope, never happened. They're like, are you sure about that? Pretty clear that's probably what it was. All right, so what do you think of when you hear about Chernobyl? Let's see. Nuclear, of course. Disaster, meltdown, Pripyat, of course. You're talking about the actual city that was affected by this primarily. Shit show. That's good summary. Avoidable. Maybe. Again, it's very illustrative of this ossified, corrupt system that really didn't have the ability to change. And the cracks were being, just like Russo-Japanese War in 1904, 1905. It was clear things were wrong, and there probably was nothing like it. Yeah, the mutation stories, HBO. Yeah, I mentioned that. Okay, so there's the actual footage of the disaster there, but let's just watch briefly the HBO trailer here because I think it's probably a little more poignant. And again, if there's any chance that YouTube shuts off the stream because I'm playing clips here, which I don't think they will. We'll just move straight to Zoom to finish. But let's just see what happens. It's a trailer, you know. Come on.
All of the good we did.
Great music too. Oh man.
It doesn't matter. What does matter is that to them, justice was done. See, a just world is a sane world. There was nothing sane about Chernobyl.
I'm pleased to report that the situation in Chernobyl is stable. In terms of radiation, I'm told it's the equivalent of a chest x-ray.
And what he's saying, this is like Gerontographer's reaction. Everything is fine. No, I heard from this one guy over here that basically it's like a chest x-ray. You know, without the lead vest for maybe 2 seconds. We're fine.
No, Chernobyl is on fire. And every atom of uranium is like a bullet, penetrating everything in its path. Metal, concrete, flesh. Now, Chernobyl holds over 3 trillion of these bullets. Some of them will not stop firing for 50,000 years.
Tell me how to put it out.
You are dealing with something that has never occurred on this planet before.
50,000 years, right? What a disaster. I'll move on. I didn't get enough of the taste of that. I've watched a good bit of the first, and I'm serious. My wife was like, I can't do this. The knowing that this is like reality is just, no. Very well done from what I saw. I didn't watch the whole series, but man. So that moment really turned Gorbachev around. He was like, we can't. This has affected so many people. It's ruined lives. It's killed people. It's destroyed families. It's destroyed a city. It's destroyed nature. This is what we have become. So one of the big things he talked about is what's called glasnost. Glasnost in Russian means openness. That's the best way to say it there, openness. And lots of people associate Gorbachev with this word, but in actuality, Gorbachev was not the first person to say this. And Stalin even used words like glasnost and perestroika back in the 1930s, but this just became this big idea. And that glasnost under Stalin is total BS, right? Yes, we have glasnost, provided I agree with it. If not, I kill you. Here, they're actually going to be open. They're going to say, okay, what are they going to do? What does this mean? So here we have Gorbachev being beat in the face by this big baby called Glasnost. If she's like this as a baby, what will she be like when she's grown up? Democracy, freedom. The political cartoonists and general people knew what this was going to lead to, right? They're like, you've suppressed knowledge in society for decades upon decades now, since 1917. People aren't going to want this system anymore once they see everything it did. So all the lies come out. Everything about the Gulag was made open. Here's what actually happened. Here's what happened with this, right? And decades of being lied to, everyone's like, how can I believe one of the greatest liars in history? So it's going to cause some of the opposite reactions. The openness was welcome, but it's going to cause further and faster breakdown. Other big thing he talked about was perestroika, which Stalin also talked about too. Perestroika means restructuring. It's the best way to translate it. It's a fine translation of that word. It means restructuring. So he's going to restructure the Soviet economy. He knows you can't keep what it is anymore. Not going to work. Problem is, it's not ready for what he's about to do. It's this deep, I keep saying this, it's this deeply entrenched system that's resistant to change. You can't just toss capitalism at it. And that's sort of what they're going to do. He's going to begin to implement policies that are very similar to NEP era Soviet Union, right? Now, that worked out quite well, if you remember, right? Coming out of the Russian Civil War, country was devastated economically. Hey, they got back all their money plus more than they even had under the Tsar with NEP. Yeah, but there were different ways they were doing that. Gulag, they were taking money from churches, they were taking their gold. So someone had mining gold from Kalima. They're not doing that anymore. So you can't rely on slave labor to get gold you're going to use for your gold standard. So they try to implement some of these things. They introduce some privatization. They release state control and certain things. Because, smartly, though, Gorbachev realized that these systems are so corrupt, they can't be in control anymore. So here you go. Okay, or we're going to have you're going to sort of all work together here in this cooperatives. They begin to implement cooperatives, for example, in the hopes that this would help to turn things around. But again, it just causes more rapid collapse. So here's another political cartoon that easily summarizes perestroika. Here we have this guy, supposed to be Gorbachev. It says, it's hard to read, but it says perestroika, motors there, and Soviet economy is the car, and he's taking it all apart. And he says, now comes the tricky part. That's a good good explanation about what it's like. Let's see here. So I think I'll give you a brief examples here. I'm just going to make sure I keep on our time here. So let's go to our next question here. Perestroika had mixed results, largely negative, but more important for our purposes is glasnost, which changed Soviet culture in many ways. Which of the following do you think was not an effect of glasnost? So there's just one correct answer. Be careful here now. Okay, what was not an effect of glasnost? The media became more vocal. The economy was enhanced. Reports of criminal acts on the part of the state became more visible. Public confidence was ruined, and the hope for the Soviet future crushed. I think it should be obvious which one of these was not an effect of glasnost. But let you figure it out there. This is a very famous Soviet magazine at the time, and Krakadila was one of the most famous publications of the Soviet Union, and they're showing the effects here of perestroika, glasnost, and it should be obvious the answers, I think. Let's try to make it as clear and simplified for our purposes as possible. You'll get more context in your textbook, of course. But media became more vocal. The economy was enhanced. Reports of criminal acts on the part of the state became more visible. Public confidence was ruined and hope for Soviet future crushed. It should be obvious which of these was not an effect of glasnost. So maybe I'll try to convince my wife to not be like, okay, let's take a break from anime, Food Wars, take a little break. I know we're in the 4th season of that, but let's try Chernobyl again. See if she can do it. I don't know, she'll make it. Pretty brutal from what I saw so far. Okay, let's see here. Looks like, looks like pretty much everyone has answered here. Most of you. 57 answered. How many in the class? Oh, yeah. So I thought we had 53. It's actually 63. Look at how many of you there are. All right, get any problems, you can just email me. I could fix things, reopen things, Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention this. A little more time here, just be brief. I forgot to mention this. I mentioned this in my Dracula class, but I don't think I mentioned this to you on Monday for our film analysis day on Zoom. If I have to open a chapter for somebody up or questions again for somebody until they finish them, the system in Top Hat actually removes those points from everybody's score in the grade book, and it will make your grade look as though it's been reduced. It's totally temporary. Once those chapters or questions are finished and they're closed again, those points go back into the system. I talked to Top Hat, and I was hoping this is something that I just didn't have set right, and they said, no, it's just how the system is built. And I said, okay, well, here's a work request. Fix that, because it freaked out tons of students these past 2 weeks. Okay. I have B. So, complete collapse by 1989. There is a Soviet grocery store during this time. And what could I get to eat? Nothing. Supply chains collapsed. Right? Supplies collapsed. People they didn't have any money. It was the collapse of the system. Now, dissident movement now is really picking up even further. Now even younger generation now that's part of this, and they're even getting more open about it. This is a big time period for Soviet music. Man, was it awesome. You had some really important bands that came out even a little bit before this. One of the most important, for example, was Akvarium, which just means aquarium, named after the first film theater in Russian history in Eastern Europe, right, was Aquarium, right? You know that they used that as a film theater way back when I gave you that lecture, Aquarium. So they actually formed 1972, and they became really big in the 1980s, and even internationally people knew more about Aquarium. So you get a taste of some of the Soviet music at this time. So now they're being open to all these ideas, which before were technically banned, although you know that they were spreading around Magnitizdat, right? They had these records they were making on old X-rays and stuff like that. So they were exposed to Western culture. It was just all under the surface. And now it's being permitted that this stuff can just come out. Oh, okay, you want to be in the punk and heavy metal, death metal, whatever? Go ahead. Go ahead and do it. Let's see what happens. So it's really interesting because in the Soviet context, they didn't see the same musical developments. I'm using music here because it's fun. It's also a good illustration of what happens with glasnost. it's very interesting because Soviet music was largely restricted in its own thing, really, from like Stalinist era up until like mid 1970s, where you have this flood of illegal music and bootlegs and stuff coming in. Really, it didn't have the developments like you saw in America, where you maybe have like jazz and Elvis and et cetera, whatever. Here they had like there was no like renaissance of music. It was just like boom, we're just gonna start trying all this stuff right now and see what happens, right? I've never heard punk before. Let me try that. I've never really heard electronica before. Let's try that too. So it's very unique. It's kind of like just developing on its own, like immediately. Like in a couple of years, it's like boom, we're gonna try electronica now. So it had a very unusual sound. Some of it. This first song is by Aquavadium. I actually put this video up myself, and I had the subtitles added to it. You're probably not going to be able to read them, but the song is called Ashes. It's about like breakdown and destruction. So this is one of Akvadium's most famous songs from 1982. Just hear it briefly, then we'll hear some great Soviet synthwave. Awesome. It's great. It's a great video too because you get to see like this breaking down glasnost there. Soviet society behind it with like cars covered in dirt and garbage and buildings getting crumbly. And this is before Gorbachev actually. That's a great shot there too when they filmed the lead singer here on top of this building, and you got the I can't. That looks like Spas na Krovi, which is actually a cathedral in St. Petersburg. But you got this classic representation of old Russian power, and he's on top of this building with these antennas, right? That are part of this modern era and the old era behind him. That's a great shot. Let's hear some of this Soviet electronica now. It's awesome. Look up Soviet synthwave. You will thank me. I give you some in your book. Let's see. This one here is good. This band Allianz, it's called Nazare. One of my favorite parts of this video, though, is these three guys dressed in black that are so into this. Let me just find them, and I'll show you a little more. Okay, here we go. Those guys right there get so into it. And I love the dude on the keyboard. He's wearing it's like they're trying to emulate Western synthwave without really knowing where it came from. They're just kind of like doing it themselves. It's really interesting. What is that guy in the back? Look at his glasses. Look at his shirt. Like, what the hell? What a great voice, too. The voices are calling me. It's like, oh, man. I'm getting into it. I'm like these guys. I'm like, hit that. Here's another famous one here. Just listen to this briefly here. This is great. It's called, oh, they moved it. Let me see here. Play this video. Okay, I don't know if I'm going to have when I play this. It's so necessary to watch. This song here is called Let's Call Each Other. Let's go ahead a little bit. Because we got to hear that beat drop. That's the best part. Let's see. Let's just listen to that synth into that guy. It's so awesome. We just skip ahead where the beat drops. We need some of that. All right there. Oh man, I can listen to that all day. You know what I'm saying? Nice. So younger generation was all about this, and they were just exploding in openness. I mean, they were into punk, and it was weird because it was like this conglomerate of ideas kind of mixed together because they weren't exposed to the organic developments of this music through 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? They didn't know who Black Sabbath was and how doom metal came from that. They didn't have that. They just get it all at once, and they start to do their own stuff. So here we have, if Fran answered your question, it just means you got it wrong. And you got the participation points, but not the correctness. Guy on the left there, Slayer. I love the guy on the right there. He's like this Soviet-era punk with the chain. But what he has behind him there, he's got a poster of Kiss with heavy metal. I mean, first off, Kiss is more like hard rock or rock. And by the way, overrated band. And the poster behind him, Perestroika, it says right there. This couldn't get more Soviet-era youth. These punk girls here, this is like the coolest looking girls I've ever seen. Look at that hair, man. And they're just absorbing this stuff without really seeing where it came from, right? Now this picture here, I still have not verified whether or not this actually happened, but it makes me laugh. You appear to have these legit Soviet era metalheads that are tormenting this poor babushka by giving her the metal sign. Like, I don't know if this is like staged or real. I've never found exactly where it came from, but even then, it's good and illustrative of this time. And then, big moment here, Berlin Wall finally collapses 1989. So everything's collapsing, literally and figuratively. Fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Now, to save some time to make sure I get to the film stuff, since we had to start a little late today, you're going to see in your book, actually, the famous speech that then President Reagan gave about this, right? Where he says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall in 1987. And everyone's like, yeah! Everyone's freaking out. Gorbachev knew that, everything was falling apart. In the video below here, you can find videos like this online, but I'm just going to make sure I save time. If I have some time, I'll go back and show it to you. But it's footage taken at that time when they opened the gates and they let people from East and West Berlin go back and forth. And you see people crying and cheering. And, I was alive at this time. I was still young, but I can remember this and the impact it had on people and what it meant. Like, we really felt like Soviet Union was finally like a more free and more agreeable country then. We were like, wow. Can't believe we're seeing these changes. Those of you at UVA too, I mean, you see this change right in front of you. If you haven't noticed, there's a piece of the Berlin Wall right outside Alderman Library, right? That was part of that wall that separated those two different peoples, right? And their beliefs and what they were and their families and their friends, and all came down. Now, film. Where is this all going to lead to in film? I don't have to put a discussion question up for that. You can guess it. Yeah, the original E-Boys. Fran, I'm telling you, you type in Soviet synthwave, you're going to be like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing I haven't heard yet. One of the most important synthwave musicians, well, she's a singer actually, she didn't write Mr. Oh, I can't remember if she actually wrote her music. I have to ask her. I'm friends with her on Facebook. It was a Ukrainian singer named Rusya. You're going to see one of her songs in the book. It's so good. There's no better song ever written, not only synthwave, but in the world, that's about an undead spiritual maiden that falls in love with the moon. You're never going to hear a better song about such a theme than that one. But she's still very active now because synthwave in the underground has become very popular over the past 10 years, and so people are like rediscovering all this stuff. But just type in Soviet synthwave on YouTube, you'll find tons of stuff like that. So what's this going to mean for film? Well, you can guess this already. Openness is going to lead to stuff you saw in music in film, right? We're going to see more openness, right? Where's it going to go? Well, it's very easy to explain. So, head of Goskino, 1972 to 1986, is Philippe Yermash. You know Yermash because he took over after Romanov during the whole Solaris debacle back in 1972, where the previous head of Goskino, Romanov, he tried to stop production on Solaris, the Tarkovsky film. And then eventually somebody above him, we still don't know who it was like, you're purged. And he was gone, and Yermash was put in place. Now, what Yermash does is he realizes that there's a big issue here with Soviet film. The corruption in the system, et cetera, that, we need films that make money. The problem is those films aren't being recognized internationally, which is restricting their returns to really domestic only, except in some rare cases. So what had happened here is during the 70s, slowly over time, the really artsy directors, these high art filmmakers like Tarkovsky, have gained more and more control over the industry. They were given more and more freedom. They were more and more resistant to change. They were more and more not resistant to change. They were more and more resistant to bow to the system, and they were becoming extremely famous internationally. But domestically, lots of their films are being shelved or very little shown. You saw that with W.R. Mysteries of the Organism. Saladas was an exception to that. Tarkovsky's other films, like Andrei Rublev, for example, shut down immediately. So now those people are angry, and they're the ones they think are making true film art. So under Irmash, you get this tradition of creating these sort of like trashy action films, and Goskina begins to fall apart. Now, this was making money domestically. There's some of these Soviet-era action films are hilarious to watch, but they were really behind the times technologically because they weren't being supported internationally. 1986, you can see Irmash is out. The Filmmakers Union, which included, would have included people like Tarkovsky, included these high art directors. They eventually take control of Goskino. Goskino's like, oh, we don't know really what we're doing anyway. Just whatever. They take control of it. And here's what they're going to do. They're like, you people like Yermash and this whole system have ruined what film should be. We are going to make film the true art of the Soviet Union like it was supposed to be. They legitimately thought that film could help fix the Soviet Union by fixing its moral fabric. Similar arguments have been made in the American film industry back in the 1930s. And the person who's the head of this was Yelem Klimov. Klimov was one of these like Tarkovsky-like directors who was a rising star here in the 1970s and begins to explode internationally early 1980s. He was like the big name after Tarkovsky was Klimov, 1933-2003. Klimov is the head of the Filmmakers Union, and he basically sets down the new rules. No more trash films. We aren't going to make... So the problem is that they're going to start making basically no mass art films. They're going to focus all on high art. They think that Soviet society needs to essentially be re-educated through film and reformed through film, and that film will fix Soviet society and be one of the things that turns it around. We're going to teach you moral reality and stuff like that in film, and film's going to be not educational, but it's going to be instructional. It's going to be artistic. It's going to be art. It needs to be recognized not just internationally, but also domestically, and that's what they sought with this. The problem was, the average viewer, even today in America, the average viewer doesn't want to watch a high art film when they're looking for films to watch to enjoy. They want to be entertained. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I mean, sometimes I'm like that. I'm always mentioning the film Rampage. I mentioned that when I talked about high art, mass art. I love The Rock. I'll watch any movie The Rock's in practically because it's The Rock and I think he's a cool guy and his films are fun to watch. The end. Do I come out of that movie with Secrets of the Human Race after I watch Rampage or Jumanji Part 5, however many of those they're going to make? No, I just want to be entertained sometimes. That's how most of society is, buying tickets for movies or paying to see films. They want to be entertained. Yeah, it's okay if you have little lessons in there, like Pixar films sometimes have deep ideas about, parenthood, et cetera, et cetera. But largely people want to be entertained. Klimov and his associates don't realize that high art films don't make money domestically because people, largely speaking, want to escape reality and not be confronted by it. But that's not what Klimov wants. Klimov and his associates, they want to make you think constantly. By 1987, Goskino no longer controlled foreign exports, only domestic distribution. And one of the ways Goskino had to survive is they started to just distribute foreign B action films and foreign Europorn. They're like, the only way we can survive is porn now. So they start distributing porn. Here you see Goskino in charge of video cassettes, for example, when those started to make the moves in Russia there. So Goskino basically fell apart. By 1988, to illustrate what happened, studios were functioning mostly independently. That's cool. The problem is, as I have here, that increased output but led to less quality, dirty money, and excess. So now that the Soviet system is breaking down, is going to collapse entirely by 1991, you have this criminal organization that begins to develop, right? And they begin this, they would come here and fund films and stuff like that if they like the idea. This is one of these famous films in this era called Tragedy in Rock Style. Tragedy in the Style of Rock. So these junk films that Yermash's policies of commercialism were promoting in the early 1980s led to this necessity that Klimov and his associates have for making high art the thing in the industry. The film industry was liberated, as they thought. Number 4, problem, though, was this liberation led to essentially, no, not essentially, 100%, complete lack of censorship by 1989, where basically anything goes. Make whatever you want. If it makes money, yay! And the problem is that all these big ideas in high art now start to fall to the wayside for things that people want to pay to see, like more violence, more sex, more drug usage. And there still might be some artistry there, but people are interested in these things that become more and more disgusting and filthy. And there's a word used to summarize all this. It's chernucha. Chernucha in Russian means, there's no real way to translate this. It kind of means like fluffy black stuff, literally. But you could translate the word as like black stuff. So the films coming out of this era, it's usually referred to as chernucha. It's called chernucha. You saw a similar thing in Yugoslavia where they called those, Yugoslavian New Wave films Black Wave for that reason. So think WR Mysteries of the Organism. It's another reason why I showed that to you and decided to pick that film. WR Mysteries of the Organism, which you watched for Monday. And imagine like almost every film by 1989 is like that. This is where this word comes from. They call it Chernucha. Tons of these films. Total breakdown. So not all these films are Chernucha, but lots of them, most of them are going to include very graphic depictions of reality and warfare and blood and gore and so forth. So let's go with Belarus, which we haven't talked about outside of your textbook. Belarus's most famous film to date is this one. Come and see, Idi Smatri. Now, technically it's a co-production, but Belarus Film, which still exists, I'm actually friends with like the owner of that company currently. It's kind of cool. Talk to him occasionally. They were Belarus Film was the primary company behind this movie. Idi Smatri was directed by Yelem Klimov. So Klimov is the guy behind this film and some others. Come and See is a partisan film in essence. And just like Yugoslavia, Belarus had a history of partisan films that were very popular. And this one is about a Nazi invasion in Belarus and the impact on local villages. And this young boy who you see in the poster here who takes part in the partisan cause and sees the atrocities Nazis commit throughout the war. So I'm just going to show you briefly the trailer here, give you some sense of what it's about. This is one of two films I'm debating showing you. There's another one I already had picked that I used last time, and it's a little more illustrative of this time. But this one is so legendary, and we haven't actually watched anything from Belarus that I would like to show to you. But let's just see this fan-made trailer here. I won't translate it; it just talks about people thought about it. Let's watch it. Get that HD quality. Some people have called this the most brutal anti-war film ever made, and it is brutal. This is one like after you watch, you're just like, oh man, human race, so horrible. Oh my God. So for Belarus, this is even today considered the greatest film that's ever come out of that country. It's an amazing film, but very hard to watch in a number of ways. So anyway, I'm thinking about that one. But Czechoslovakia, what have they been doing? Well, Czechoslovakia really kind of fell into ruin after the 1960s. They started to focus so much on fantasy and sci-fi and horror as a safe space that they started to lose like their essence in filmmaking, until where eventually pretty much all films fell under one guy. I shouldn't say that. What I should say is that the Czechoslovakian industry, and today Czech Republic's industry, is largely represented by one guy, and that's director Jan Švankmajer, who is nicknamed the Alchemist. There's a reason for that. Švankmajer is an incredible director. What he's known for doing is animating films using live objects. So he'll take like a human body and film it in stop motion. It's very bizarre. 1982, he came out with this very famous series of films called Dimensions of Dialogue. Definitely one I recommend to do your paper on because it's relatively short and it's very interesting. But in terms of his full-length films, one of his most famous is called Alice, usually in English translation, 1988, which in Czech actually means something from Alice. Něco z Alienky is the actual title in Czech. Here's the other English poster. His wife did a lot of these posters. All you got, so Alice is based on Alice in Wonderland, and his films are deeply symbolic. All you gotta do is like watch like a couple seconds of this, and you'll be like, what the hell? This guy is weird. I'll just show you some bits of this. Let's see. Like when the rabbit comes alive here. And suddenly the scene changes. Like you gotta watch the whole movie. He uses like animal skeletons and stuff as representations of the character in the book. All his films are pretty much like this, where you watch him, you're like, this guy, like next level bizarro. Like it's amazing. So even today, Czech film, this is like the #1 guy that anyone has heard of when they hear about Czech film. And there are other filmmakers, but this is like the guy everybody knows. It's Schwankmeier. He's absolutely amazing. Oh, Hungary. Achieves notoriety for its Oscar-winning Mephisto 1981, which is about Nazi impact in Hungary and this actor who decides to essentially sell his soul figuratively to the Nazi party in order to achieve fame. It's a representation of the famous play Faust by Goethe, a German play. It's a great film as well. How about Poland? Poland has a number of interesting films come out in the 80s, and they're very dark and depressing. Probably the most important is Interrogation from 1982, but I have 1989 there slashed because it wasn't officially distributed until that time because it was banned by the Polish government. It's about a young woman who is cheating on her husband and then gets involved because of her lover's involvement in what the purge system thinks is anti-Polish politics and so forth. He because of her relationship to him, she then gets dragged into prison and then is interrogated and tries to commit suicide. Absolutely brutal. It's openness, right? It's the reality of what that system did to Poland. What does socialist interrogation do to its citizen? Watch this movie. Russia, though. What do we got? Well, here's the other film. This is the film I showed last year. Agonia, Agony. It's another Klimov film. That's one reason why I want to choose it. But Klimov actually is working on this in the 1970s, and it went under all these problems in production and was halted and wasn't officially released until 1981 when he's finally able to get it finished. So it's like sort of a 1970s film, which is one of the reasons I'm hesitant to still use it. But it's extremely illustrative of this breakdown period in gerontocracy and the end of the Soviet era. And it's doing that by representing a story of Rasputin and the downfall of the Tsardom back in 1917. So it's very symbolic, representative of end of Soviet period, but it works really well too as a teaching tool, and it's a great film. The actor who plays Rasputin in this, it's absolutely insane. Like you'll be so creeped out thinking, is this how Rasputin actually was? Yeah, pretty much. And you'll be like, man, that stuff was crazy. This stuff was crazy, yo. God. So this is students really liked it last time, so I might keep that one. There's also comedies. I mentioned this one last time. King Zaza is this excellent black comedy. It's a sci-fi film too from 1986 that is very famous. Russian memes that go around about this. Q. You pull this meme out to Russian on Facebook or their version of Facebook. They'll be like, Q. I won't even explain what that is. You have to watch it. One of these films, though, that relates to the musical tradition that's happening here in Glasnost period is Asa, 1987, which features very important Russian musician Viktor Tsoi, 1962-1990. This is kind of like the Russian Kurt Cobain, if you will, before Kurt Cobain really is achieving big success. So Viktor Tsoi was in a very important band called Kino. What else, right? It's called cinema, right? We know where that word came from. You know this whole class now. 1982 and 1990, they had a number of important hits. And this band is really primarily the reason that Soviet youth music was becoming noticed worldwide. They had an interview, for example, in Rolling Stone and stuff. But Viktor Tsoi starred in a couple of these films. He's in Asa. And I don't have time to show this to you, but at the end of the film, which is what I had the bottom clipper, you can watch this film yourself if you want to do analysis of it. At the end, there's a very famous scene where he sings a song about change in front of this big group of Soviet youth. It changes from a small club to this huge gathering. It's a very famous, iconic moment for a Soviet youth film. But one of the most illustrative is this right here, and this is definitely 100% the other one you're going to watch, regardless of what I pick for the first film. Little Vera, 1988, is this perfect representation in the most famous film that illustrates Chernuka, as well as illustrates the breakdown of Soviet society and its impact on Soviet youth alive at that time through the main character named Vera. So you're going to watch that one. Another one of Victor Tsoi that's very famous and part of the so-called Kazakh New Wave is The Needle, first Soviet drug film. So in this film, a young man played by Victor Tsoi tries to save an ex-girlfriend from her drug addiction and drug dealers by trying to take her out to Kazakhstan to have her purified, but it doesn't work. And he encounters all these problems. And so the fighting scenes and stuff, this very curious combination of artistry and action. So The Needle, another good one. So, and by the way, I'm a little over time here, so I'm going to finish this. But if you have to go, to your next class, by all means, this is the last thing anyway. Yugoslavia. Lots of interesting films coming out of Yugoslavia at this time too, but we're getting towards the Yugoslav Wars, which I'll talk about next lecture on next Wednesday, I should say. Probably the most famous film that comes out of this era for Yugoslavia is this famous black comedy that illustrates Chernuka as well. I guess you could call it Black Wave since it's Yugoslavian. Is this Serbian black comedy called Strangler versus Strangler about this musician that becomes really interested in the serial killer and starts to emulate him, and then he starts to track down the serial killer to kill him. It's really, it doesn't do it justice. You'd have to watch it. Strangler versus Strangler is like this iconic Serbian film that if you talk to a Serbian, like, you ever seen this? They'll be like, oh man, you know that movie? Oh yeah. Davitel proti Davitel, yeah, that's like one of the most famous Serbian comedies ever. It's very dark and depressing in ways, but also hilarious for that. So, any rate, so that brings us to the end of this lecture for today. Just went a little over there. So for Monday, Little Vera will be one of the films, definitely. And I'm debating between Come and See and Agony. Students really liked Agony last time, but I don't want to just have two Russian films. Belarus, for its history and filmmaking, that is the most important film that's ever come out of that country. So it's important you see it at some point, I feel. It's a great movie, but it's also very dark and it's just bleak and brutal on a number of ways. So I'm debating that. So those will be up by tomorrow for you to watch over the weekend. So anyone have any other further questions? Do I teach Dracula every spring? Yes, I do. And I'll tell you, though, I had to reduce my enrollment numbers for this coming fall and spring, unfortunately, just, rooms and stuff like that. I do what the associate dean and everybody tells me to do. So we had to reduce our enrollments by 100. So since the first two sessions of Dracula are digital in the summer, in summer we do different stuff, by the way. If you're really interested and don't think you'll be able to get in the fall, which you might not be able to because that fills up fast and the wait list goes to the top like in a day. Summer session, we have lots of openings there and we do some crazy stuff. And now it's going to be digital, but I got some things planned that apply to how I used to do it. Usually for summer, we have some field trips and stuff we do, so I can't do that. But the final exam, for example, is traditionally been a live action role playing game. You have to pretend to be a vampire. So we're gonna have to. I have a way we can do that online, So, but I will teach it in spring. So if you want to take it Dracula next spring in 2021, I will be teaching it then, unless something would happen, but it's unlikely. I'm already contracted to do that, so it should be. Anyone have any other questions here before I close up shop for today? I'll just wait here a couple of seconds. And by the way, lecture from last week, I'll close those now because this is meant to be open just for a week so people can finish the questions and stuff remotely if need be. So just let me know if you have any further questions or otherwise I'll shut down here and get ready for my next class. Okay. Efrain, I'm telling you, man, you go check out Soviet Sinful Age. You'll come back and be like, thank you. I don't know how I can thank you for this, the key to the gate you've given me, sir. All right, looks like we have no further questions. Any problems, of course, email me and I can always fix things and open up questions and chapters. This chapter, of course, won't be open until next Monday after we finish our film analysis. Okay, everybody, it looks like there's no further questions. Thanks a lot. I will see you then next Monday for our next film analysis and then next Wednesday for our final actual lecture. And then that will be it for this. Okay, so thanks a lot. I will see you next time.